You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today's topic is the Social Documentary Network, or SDN, and we welcome Glen Ruga, its founder and executive director, and photographer Sofia Aldinio, who received the SDN 2021 ZEKE Award for documentaries for her series Awake in the Desert Land. We welcome back Sofia, a return guest. Social Documentary Network began in 2008 and is, I quote, a global community of documentary photographers, editors, curators, NGOs, students, journalists, and others who believe in the power of visual storytelling to build understanding and appreciation for the complexities, nuances, wonders, and contradictions that abound in the world today. In 2015, SDN launched ZEKE, the magazine of global documentary, a print and digital magazine representing the best stories from the Social Documentary Network, and if I might add, it's a gorgeous publication. Like anyone who works in documentary photography, Glen wears several hats. He's a photographer, a graphic designer, a curator, and a chief bottle washer of the whole organization. He's curated exhibitions for the New York Photo Festival, including work by Bruce Davidson, Platon, Eugene Richards, and Laurie Grinker. From 2010 to 2013, Ruga was the executive director of the Photographic Resource Center at Boston University. Thank you again for joining us, Glen, and thank you again, Sofia, for joining us again. At the beginning of the second half of the program, we're going to give all of you Sofia's bona fides, including the award she has received for a project in Baja California, Mexico, and all of the upcoming good news regarding Photoville 2021. But Glen, before we talk specifically about SDN, can you tell us a bit about your photographic work in Bosnia and related activism? Is this a personal story for you? Can you describe your work in Holyoke? And welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. It's great to be here. Always love to talk about documentary photography. And, you just asked a question about my prior work in Bosnia and Holyoke. Well, let me put that in chronological order because it's important to talk about how SDN developed. The Holyoke work came earlier in around 1990 when I was completing an MFA program at Syracuse University. Holyoke is in western Massachusetts along the Connecticut River Valley, which is partially an old industrial area fed by the river of mills, and in Holyoke's case, paper mills. And like many industrial mill towns in New England, it had fallen on hard times because mills sought cheaper labor elsewhere. But also there was a large immigrant community in Massachusetts providing agricultural labor, and in this case, primarily from Puerto Rico. So the agricultural workers needed places to live, and they just moved into Holyoke and into former worker housing by the mills, created a very interesting sociological dynamic. So I embarked there on, really classic reportage documentary. Myself and another colleague, Frank Ward, a photographer, just started walking around the streets taking pictures. And, it's a very stressful thing at first if anybody's ever tried doing this, but it's really the core of the documentary process. And, we met people and took pictures. And of course, people were suspicious at first. Who are we? Why are we there? But nothing ingratiates you more with the community than coming back the next week with 8x10 glossies. And of course, this was, the day of analog, and we're all shooting black and white. And I was shooting 35 millimeter and 2.25. My colleague Frank Ward actually was, believe it or not, there with an 8x10 view camera. So we were doing quite different types of work. And then eventually Frank's wife, Vivian Lescas, got involved. She's a writer and spoke fluent Spanish, and she was conducting interviews. And finally, we put this together in an exhibition in Holyoke with these large-scale prints, like 40 by 60 prints that we printed ourselves, mounted ourselves, put up in this Heritage State Park, an interior space. And that was the first iteration of this project. So that was about 1990. And that project traveled around quite a bit. I still have these pictures hanging up in my house, in my office. But 2 years later, the war in Bosnia started. I barely knew anything about Bosnia or the Balkans, except I may have heard of it, particularly because of the Olympics that was there not too much earlier. But I had no family connection to the region. But what my family connection is Jewish. And the concept of never again always sat with me. And here was this genocide happening again in Europe. And it just really drew me in from a human rights perspective and a humanitarian perspective, and not at first from a photographic perspective. I got very involved in activism and public education and advocacy. I co-founded an organization that eventually became the Center for Balkan Development. And the first time I went to the region wasn't to take pictures. It was on a humanitarian project. But of course, I brought my camera along with me, an old Nickermat. And thus began about a 6 or 7 year period of traveling to the Balkans regularly, both to do humanitarian work, but also to do photographic work, including one trip that was specific for that. And this developed into a traveling photography project that traveled all across the U.S. And then later on in the Balkans, there became the Kosovo War, which was just as bad as what was going on in Bosnia. I spent time there as well. Both of these projects I did with Frank Ward, the same person I photographed in Holyoke, Massachusetts with. So this was about the time when the internet was starting to come into its own. And what I haven't said yet previously in this introduction, and I'm sorry for how long this introduction is, but my day job has always been as a graphic designer. And at the time I was learning web design as well. So I was able to cobble together websites on both of these projects so that they were able to reach much greater audiences. And then it occurred to me about this time that there must have been many other documentary photographers around the world with many important stories to tell that didn't have the web skills that I had. And I met up with some Indian developers at the time who we agreed to work together, and they did all the heavy lifting of doing the programming and coding for the site. And in 2008, we launched this website that allowed documentary photographers from anywhere in the world to create their projects online and show them to people anywhere in the world.
What was your vision for the site at that point? I mean, did you have any long-term idea of where it would go or how it would develop, or what was kind of the strategy at that point?
I must say at the time, my hopes were that it was an entrepreneurial project, that it would have a tremendous amount of traction. And there is a fee-based system. I mean, back then, exhibits were free for 3 months, and then photographers would pay a fee after 3 months to maintain their projects. More recently, we changed that so that exhibits are free for the first year, actually. But, I was hoping that this would develop into an actual full-time job for me. What I realized pretty quickly was that wasn't going to happen. I mean, it did grow. It grew very slowly, but, to this, 13 years later, we've featured over 3,500 projects on the site. But, it took a long time to get there. And, the money wasn't flowing and nobody wanted to pour money into this. But I loved it. I loved doing it. I thought we were providing a very important service, and I still had my graphic design practice. So, I kept at it. It basically paid for itself. And I feel, and other people feel, that we developed a very important service to the photography community and for people who love to learn about the world through photography. And, since then, we've since gone on to many other types of programs and projects, which we can talk about
something
as well.
I'm kind of curious about is the ZEKE magazine, the fact that you have a print publication, which is something that used to be a common item. I mean, I used to have Look magazine, Life magazine. You used to have a lot of magazines specifically about what you do, journalism and long-term and short-term stories. What made you take the jump to print, which is something that most people look at as ancient and archaic, even though I think there are some amazing print magazines actually coming out these days that are probably nicer than some of the older ones that used to be out there. But what made you make the transition?
The primary motivation was at that time in 2015, there were a lot of websites out there presenting photography online, and quite a few presenting the type of photography we did. And it just wasn't such a special thing any longer to be able to put your work out on the internet because it was ubiquitous. It was all over. Everybody was doing it. And, what made us special? It was hard to really stand out in that. But the way we could stand out was to do what people really love, is to do a printed product of this work, really feature it large and bold, and something that people can hold in their hands. So to view it is a very beautiful thing, a very tactile thing. But also to the photography community, it was much more of a badge of honor to a photographer to have their work in print than it was to be on another website out there.
I still believe that there's an element of credibility that happens when you have your photographs in print in a magazine. Maybe because it takes more effort and it's harder to do, and there are less opportunities and portals for doing this. But like you said, anybody can post a picture on Instagram or anywhere else and have your pictures viewed all over the planet by anybody. A magazine is a different thing.
Yeah, that is so true.
Yeah.
It's a very different experience.
And there's also the validation that, even if a site is curated and curated incredibly, to have somebody choose your work, to go to the effort to edit it, to do the graphic design and to get it out there, it's showing that your work is important, and
being on press. There's nothing like that when you're posting a picture on Instagram.
You bring up a good point about the editing, though. And the big difference between ZEKE Magazine and the SDN website is that the SDN website is very open. We encourage photographers anywhere to put up their work. There's a minimal approval process. Work needs to be submitted, and we do review it and give it permission to go live. And the only times we reject work is if it just isn't documentary. But other than that, we pretty much allow it all to go live. And we pretty much use verbatim the text that the photographers provide. ZEKE is quite the opposite. ZEKE is very heavily edited. We also bring in professional writers to write accompanying texts that go with the articles. So it's a totally different type of experience. There's much more thoughtful process that goes into the final product than goes into the SDN website or most other websites.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because, when you look at SDN, you don't just see, in my opinion, you see an online magazine. You don't really feel that this is just a kind of site where people can put their work up. And I think that's a great aspect of it, that people have just this kind of easy access to get their work out there, because for a lot of people, it's hard to, to break that barrier. And if you can just do it yourself, and if you feel your editing is there and you put it up, that's great. But at the same time, you guys do have, photos that you seem to, and I'm looking at it right now, and there's a scroll of images of different photographers. Is that something that is generated by the website itself and the algorithms, or are you guys choosing those that go through? And
yeah, that's an important point. While most work that's submitted to SDN does go live on the site, we curate what's on the homepage. So we choose what is featured large, what is featured smaller, or what's featured at all even. So some work is on the website, but you'll never see it on the homepage. It's only available by searching for the photographer, or if the photographer chooses to promote it themselves.
Right. And do you guys then work with your own Instagram page and other outlets to get people to SDN, or how do people tend to find it?
Sure. Our most successful method of outreach has always been email, and it still is. Although, we do have the full repertoire of social media with Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. But we really get the most response from our email list, which we send out regularly. But, we do push out the work on our social media accounts, and, it's a great way to just further the outreach of the work and to further the support of the photographers by doing that.
You can really, really get lost in this site. I mean, just by going to the highlighted images, you click onto those stories and you go from there. I mean, you could spend a day and then you start to really dig into this stuff. And it's really an incredible resource, I have to say. Hey, Sofia, can I ask, in your experience, how did you come across SDN and when did you first submit and how did your experience go?
Yeah, so in 2014, I went to documentary school here in Maine at SALT Institute. So, part of the program, they push you to produce 2 body of work. And, when you're finishing school, you're like, okay, what's up now? What do I do with my work? Like, where can I share it?
Who's going to tell me how wonderful I am now?
Exactly.
Seriously. Who's going to be patting you on the back?
Exactly.
That's something you have to have inside of you once you leave school.
And I think it's like, that is one of the hardest thing about being, a freelance photographer. It's like you are constantly working on your own. Mm-hmm. And unless you're like doing a workshop or you join these communities, like you're by yourself and it's hard to, get feedback on your work and, get support. And so when I finish my program, I think I was looking for ways to, to connect with, with this audience. So I was like looking for ways to get my work out there. And I can't remember how I came across, but I did come across a social documentary network. And I remember I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a go. So I upload one of my projects that I did about a family that is part of the Russian Orthodox church community here in Maine. And they have 5 kids and they left their jobs and decided to live off the grid of the land. And they have a very interesting lifestyle. And I actually upload that work into the website. And it was, I think my teacher sent me an email, was like, oh, your work was spotlighted by SDN. I was like, oh, wow. So yeah, it was good to feel like my work at least was seen by somebody. When you first finish school, you're like, it's so overwhelming to think, what is going to come next for you.
Did the anonymity of the fact that you could just kind of upload your images and your project without having to go through an editor or kind of that anxiety of approval and appreciation, did that have an input in you putting your work there to begin with?
Yes, I think, when I finished school, I didn't know much about, just working with editors. So I think it felt really good being able to have the opportunity to upload my work into a site and have somebody review it and say, oh, this work, is good and it's worth for someone else to have a look. And then you can read about the photographer and connect with the photographer if you want, or, just find other stories that are similar to your story.
Gotcha. And Glen, can you follow up a little bit with, SDN is not just a site that puts out people's work. There's so much going on. You guys have seminars and workshops, you do exhibits. How did it can you talk a little bit about the evolution? Is it something that just grew organically as it went along, or what decisions were made? And when did you realize this is something maybe bigger than you initially started?
Yeah. Well, it was an organic and slow development, but at some point we realized it was more than just a website, that we were an organization and we had a community of photographers, and we wanted to find ways to engage with this community and engage with this work in all the different ways that are possible.
When did you decide that, you're going to be kind of all in on this? I know obviously you have other things going and your work is multifaceted, but doing SDN is probably a full-time job, is it not?
It's totally a full-time job. And when I decided to go full, well, I mean, it's been a slow development over the years from, very part-time. When it was just a website, it was much easier, much less demanding. But over that time, too, my graphic design business really became less important and just less viable over time. And I just started putting more and more of my time into SDN until now that I still do some, independent design consulting, but it's not what it used to be like. And so I'm pretty much in it full time now. COVID has really made a difference. I mean, I hate to say it, but in a positive way for us, for all the tragedies that it's caused the world over. But, because, we exist in a very digital space, our education program really took off when COVID started because people were looking for, virtual ways to experience the world. So our education program has become very active and popular. And because of the success of that, we decided to start doing reviews for the first time, which we did last year, which was a very successful program, based on a similar idea that anywhere, both reviewers and reviewees anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country can engage with us.
And the courses, I remember last spring, I believe it was, I was looking at a course that you offered with photographer Sarah Blessner. I'm curious now, is that one of the sources of funding? I mean, how do you guys kind of keep a roof over your head, as you say?
The education program, since, there are fees for the courses, it is a source of revenue, an important source of revenue for SDN. I mean, in terms of the bigger picture about revenue sources, the education program, the reviews, user fees on the website, which is very important for paying for just the basic operations of the website. And then we are a nonprofit now. We haven't discussed that, but just last year, we finally became a formal nonprofit organization with a board of directors, allowing us to take tax-deductible contributions. So, we do fundraising.
I would love to add something. At the end of last year, I took a class with Brian Frank through the SDN education program. And it was like such an amazing experience. That was my first time I was doing a class online. And it was really like an amazing experience. And after that, I decided to take the next class because I knew I was in Mexico and I wanted some support while I was doing my project down in Mexico. And I was able actually to get a scholarship through SDN, which I think, provide me with all the tools to get where I am right now with my project. So in that way, I'm forever thankful with Glen and SDN about providing with that opportunity to let me join the program. And I had the opportunity to learn from Sarah Blessner and Brian Frank. That was incredible. And right after that class, I actually did my first ever portfolio review with SDN, also online.
As a reviewer or as a photographer?
As a photographer.
Okay.
So
okay.
it was at that time I was just back from Mexico, and Brian and Sarah really helped me out to to edit my project and get it all together. And then I was part of the review program, and it was like an amazing experience too. I had this great connection with a lot of editors. They are really great reception with my project. So yeah, SDM for me really has been a place where I feel I can put my work out there and show it, and it gets really well received. So I'm really thankful for SDN and everything they do. I always think about something that Brian Frank told me, that is if you really need to use your words to explain that photograph, it's probably because that photograph is missing something.
Bingo.
So I always keep that in the back of my mind when I'm editing, and I always ask myself questions. But right now, I feel very lucky because I feel like I have a group of friends, colleagues, photographers, editors that I can actually send my work and be like, look, I have new work, I'm editing, this is my edit, these are some extra photos, love to hear what you think. And it's always, it's always great I have 2 people that I usually send my work to, and it's great to have that. So I always recommend, to find 1 or 2 people where you can really show your work and get some feedback.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And are there plenty of editors and creative directors that find their way through SDN? I mean, is there opportunities outside of, let's say, the documentary community, perhaps in photojournalism work? I mean, are assignments being found through photographers who post their work, or is it kind of a community that speaks to itself to a more of a degree?
No, there are a lot of photo editors who look at SDN regularly because they're just always looking for either new talent or people who are covering issues that the editors are interested in because they could search for subject matter. So yeah, we found that the photo editor community is fairly active on SDN. Looking for new work, and they appreciate it as just another source. On the other hand, we don't get involved in those interactions,
Right.
So we don't. A photo editor, would just contact the photographers directly. The way I know this is talking to photo editors have just told me directly that they really appreciate the website and they do refer to it regularly.
And would you say, Glenn, that it's become what you had hoped? I imagine that maybe at the beginning you weren't sure where it was going to go, and that's normal, of course. But I mean, looking back now, are you pleased with where it's gone? I mean, it's kind of what you hoped it would be? Does it kind of check the boxes in terms of access and quality of work and just the fact that the community has built around it?
Yeah, totally. And probably more so than I ever thought, given all the different types of work we're doing and our outreach to photographers around the world. For us, the global component of it has always been very important, that not only do we want to engage with photographers from all over the world, but we want our viewers to be able to see these projects from places that they never would have heard about or seen before. There's so many things that I've learned about myself looking at these new projects in SDN that are just incredible. Like just one case in point, the Rohingya refugee crisis. I remember 5 or 6 years ago, a photographer from Bangladesh posting a project about the Rohingya. I never heard of this group of people. They're extraordinary photographs. The story about them were so extraordinary. And then, a few years later, it became, the focus of international concern because of the genocide that had occurred there. So that, that's just one case in point.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to be speaking more with Sofia Aldinio and talk about Photoville 2021. Stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. As mentioned, Sofia Aldinio is a recipient of the 2021 ZEKE Award for documentary for her series Awake in the Desert Land, which documents the effects climate change is having on life in small communities in Baja California, Mexico, that depend directly on natural resources to survive. She's also worked with nonprofits on other series related to immigration and the preservation of cultural heritage, including a documentary project with refugees living in Portland, Maine. Her work has been published in Edge of Humanity magazine, Portland Press Herald, Maine Today, Outside Magazine, Backcountry Magazine, and of course, ZEKE Magazine. Sofia is also a past guest on the program, and the last time we know you were loading up your car with your husband and your kids and about to head south, literally on an epic journey from Maine to Argentina. That is about as heading south as one can get. How'd that all work out?
Well, we just got stuck in Mexico. No, really, what happened was the pandemic. We had this plan. We were going to drive from Maine to Argentina, from my husband's home to my home, but then the pandemic happened, so we just couldn't do it.
So was the pandemic actually in effect when you left, or did it all start happening while you're en route?
Well, it just started happening when we're about to cross the border to Mexico. So we were, what do we do? Should we go? Should we not go? So we just decided to hold on for a couple of months, and then, we're still waiting. But last year we decided to actually go to Mexico and spend there like 4 or 5 months. I can't remember how long we were there, but we decided to just go and spend time in Baja California. Yes, Baja California, Mexico.
Mm. And can you talk a little bit then? I mean, did the project kind of develop from your time there and the places that you were staying and living? And
how did it change in the course of all after you set out to do one thing and then reality set in, so you had to change your plans? So how much did that affect your plans?
So before going to Mexico, even just before the pandemic, I have been researching online, and I had this idea that I wanted to do some work down in Baja California. My start point was what I was researching was how small fishing communities are being affected by climate change and the amount of fish they can catch every day. So that was like my starting point and what I had in mind that I wanted to start researching. So when we crossed to Baja California, that's what I started doing. I just started talking to people and going really early in the morning where the fishing boats were and starting to understand what is happening. And, keeping in mind that it was still, COVID times, and I didn't know really how much I was going to be able to to access or to, get involved in this story. But I have to say that I'm very proud for the whole Baja California, because they are, taking the pandemic really serious. So everyone was just wearing masks and, just taking all the precautions that they could from the virus. So that felt really good. And I actually felt pretty safe, connecting to people. So, I was there for 4 months. So, one thing took me to another one. I started meeting more people, and I started realizing that the story was going beyond just really fishermen struggling. So I started traveling inland too, and meeting really small communities living in the mountains, completely off the grid, and really understanding what is happening, really, that there is no rain, there is, the water levels are going down, and what is happening, everything is dry. So the animals can't really feed as they used to. The way I work is I usually don't have a plan, and I don't like having a plan. I just really go and immerse myself in a story, and I just start making photographs and really just listening what the people have to say. And then usually what happens is I come back, or I just step away from the story, and then I just look at all the photographs and really start writing and thinking about what is really the story. And then, I started doing some research about climate change and what is really happening in Baja California, Mexico. And what I started to understand was that there is we have the tangible repercussions of climate change. That is, for example, there is, I don't know, a huge hurricane, and then that comes out of the blue, and then they leave, maybe a lot of people affected. But there is also these intangible repercussions that climate change has on these communities. And I think that was what really caught my attention and my eye, and that's what's really where kind of my heart landed. And I found it really interesting because there is, this change that is happening that we can't really see, but it's happening. And what is happening is like all the older generation are telling all the young generation to move away, just to leave their communities, to go to the bigger cities. And what is happening is a big disconnection from, the older generation to the younger generation. And there's just going to be a loss of culture and tradition. And yeah, that, I don't know, it really hit me. I was really drawn to this idea to really document this. But it's really hard because it's like, how do you really put that in photographs? So my project is really, about it's about capturing these moments that for me reflect this conflict that is happening, but in a subtle way. Yeah.
And it seems like you brought that idea with you to the work that you're doing in Portland, right? I mean, it seems to have a lot to do with how communities and people and individuals can bring culture or how they leave culture behind, and you're right, it's very hard to kind of to photograph that.
Yeah, so I lived in Maine since 2014, and I think that was the first time it really hit me. I was like, I'm an immigrant, and I in the past I traveled a lot, and now reflecting the way I used to travel, for me, every time I will cross a border, or I will go to Europe, or I'll come to the US, I will put aside and interview for 3 hours by at the airport, and it was stressful. And I think coming here to Maine, and there's a really big immigrant community. It was, I don't know, it became almost hard to give the back to these stories. I don't know. It was my own story. I will see my own story reflecting in these people's stories. So what I did is I got a grant from the Maine Art Commission here in Maine, and I worked for a couple of years documenting some of the immigrant stories here. But I just didn't want to just make photographs and just put them on a website. So what I wanted to do was just get really the community together here and get the immigrant community and the people that was born and grew up here in Maine. And so I created these events where these people could meet each other, and I photographed the people and the objects that they brought, which they're usually maybe 1 or 2 objects. And then we had the objects in the show. And yeah, it was a space where people could really understand these stories and why are these people here, and why are we here? Because I'm an immigrant too. So, and then that became a travel exhibit in Maine. So the story that I'm doing in Mexico, I wanted to actually work on something that was more environmental, but it's about environmental and culture, but it's also about migration, because what is happening is, these people are migrating to other cities, and they're also migrating north.
You brought up an interesting point a couple of times that I just want to go back to. I think it's important for photographers, especially younger photographers, to understand, and is that you on several times you've mentioned you set out to do something. You had a goal, a project, a thought in mind. And along the way, as you're doing these photographs and working on this project, you start realizing and noticing other things and little side projects and things that you weren't even perhaps aware of early on that have a lot to do with the story you're doing or where a story can go. And I think it's an important thing to be able to keep this in mind when you are working on a project, that yes, you have this goal and you have this template of what you're working on and how you're envisioning it. But it's also really important to be open to things that you were not aware of earlier that you might be seeing along the way, and take a moment, consider it, and wonder, is this where I should be going next, or should I include this?
Yes, I think for me, yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think it's important to, we go out there with an idea of something that we want to do, but really we're working with other people. We have to step back and listen what is happening to them, and really, understand what the story is. Until, for me, it became really important in my work to do work collaborative. So it's important for me to listen really what is the most important thing to say and what is really the story here.
And I'm wondering, Sofia, and maybe Glen, you can chime in too, how much of that understanding of your own story comes from reflection, comes from not taking pictures, from even perhaps looking at the photos and thinking about them, or even just time away. I think you hinted at that a bit, but this idea of figuring out where the story is going often comes from something that's not photographic at all.
Well, we all bring our whole humanity into any of these stories, and a lot of it is driven by the facts on the ground, by the pictures, by the people you're meeting. But we all have very complicated, extensive lives, and that's always part of this story somewhere as well. It needs to be.
I want to point that actually, for me, it took longer in terms of like time, work, like the post production, in terms of like when I came back, I feel like I spent about 3 or 4 months really understanding what the story was and writing about it and putting the edit together. Really just being out in the field and making the photograph. I feel like it was like a 20 or 30% what it came after. Because, when you're, at least like in this moment in time where, news go, they circulate so fast and there is a lot of misinformation out there. For me, like the work that we do as documentary photographers is really important. Like I look up for, other photographers and colleagues, what work are they doing? And I really believe in their work. And it's a way for me to understand what is happening in other communities. So for me, when I'm putting this work out there, like I am doing my research, and I need to make sure that this story, is, like it needs to be, I need to check my facts, like this story needs to be true, whatever I'm saying. So a lot of the work we do, or I do after I photograph is pretty heavy. It's a lot of work.
There's another point I kind of want to draw out and see where it goes. Glen, you mentioned something when you were talking about the work you were doing in Massachusetts, and Sofia indicated something also, which is, you just kind of start at ground level. I mean, you kind of start hitting the streets, I think is the phrase you used, Glen, but you really need to kind of, as a documentarian, I feel you have to kind of just start at the most basic level. I mean, if you come in with ideas in your head, or if you come in with an assignment, let's say, as a photojournalist, you're not going to build the project up from the ground. And I'm curious, do you guys find that is true? Do you need to kind of really start, let's say, humble, start low, and then work your way up, figuring things out with the community that you're working in?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to hear me talk about Sofia with her project in Baja California, Mexico, that she described her entree into this community, almost the same way that I described my entree into the Holyoke community 25 years earlier, where you just kind of show up and here we are. But, for quality documentary, I think that's what's needed. And it's quite different than some types of photojournalism where, there's this whole media network possibly behind what you're doing with objectives and limited time and budgets are consideration. With pure documentary work, it's, you're just really starting with people. Often one person is with a camera and another person is not. And a lot of documentarians don't even start with a camera. They just start just by meeting people and trying to get to know them and develop a level of trust before a camera even shows up.
I think showing up with a camera and almost immediately bringing it up to your face in front of other people's is probably one of the worst ways you could start any kind of meaningful project of this type, because
that is so true.
It just sends out the wrong message to me.
Well, I have to say something about that. Like, I used to have, a Canon DSLR that I still have, but I don't use that camera anymore. That camera was too big. I couldn't just show up with that camera. But I do like to always show up with my camera because they know from moment one that I have my camera with me and this is what I'm doing. So now I have I shoot all my documentary work with just a small Fuji, which I love. It's an X100V and it's been great. And that's everything I carry with me. And it's almost, it's so small, it's almost invisible. And I think talking about how we show up, I always show up as a human with my camera. I just start hi, hello, I'm, just as a human.
I agree with you, but the thing is, you don't say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and then lift the camera to your eye and start taking pictures. You establish a relationship first. Yes, your camera's with you. You're not hiding that, but you're establishing a relationship. And I don't think you could get too far to do meaningful work of this type if you do not establish a personal relationship with whoever it is that you're photographing. Yeah, and there are times when you pull out a camera and you grab the shot because it won't happen again. And yeah, that happens. But for what you're doing, no, I think you really have to establish a relationship and a trust if you really want to get good results.
Yeah, no, I agree. I have to say sometimes I show up and then I take, if I feel like the situation, lets me, I take a photo just to laugh about it. But no, those photos, you're never going to use those photos.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that some of the earlier work I'd done in Holyoke, I was shooting 2.25 with a twin lens reflex, and Frank was shooting with an 8x10 view camera. And showing up with that type of equipment you really develop a different type of relationship with your subjects than something that's more akin to an M16, which is what a DSLR is like.
No, that's very true. I had a friend who for many years, for even casual portrait work, he did a lot of editorial stuff. He would show up, he had an 8x10 Deerdorf that he loved, and he would often use that. It was overkill, but he found early on that when he started setting up that camera, whoever it was he was photographing, they would say, this person's taking this seriously. This is an event. Taking a camera or your phone and aiming it and going smile is one thing. But when you're setting up something like that, that shows the person that you're photographing that you care and you want this to be something different and something special. So there is a lot of value to working around with a twin lens camera or an 8x10 or anything that's not fast and dirty.
Yeah, that's so true.
100%. Yes.
And so can we talk a little bit about Photoville? I know SDN has been at Photoville over the years, and this year you have a lot of things planned. I'm happy that Photoville is happening, as we all are. And Sofia, your project's going to be spotlighted, from what I understand. So maybe you guys can just give us some information on that.
Sure. Well, Photoville has gone through quite a few changes since COVID. I mean, everybody has known it as the container exhibitions, which they had done for 8 years. But then when COVID started, which was their first festival under COVID was last year, and it was all outdoor exhibits on weatherproof vinyl material. And so we did exhibit that. And for us, actually, that was very successful because, for one, traditionally, Photoville had been a 2-week event. Now it was a 2-month event. These banners were up for a long period of time, so it actually got a lot more visibility. And, I actually like the outdoor space better than the indoor containers. Some people...
Well, you don't like sweating in tin boxes?
Well, you hit it on the head. And the lighting, no matter how much they try, there's such a contrast between the bright outdoors and then you walk in these darker containers. And that's always challenging.
Yeah.
So this year, we do have an outdoor exhibit. We're presenting Sofia's work and the other co-winner of the ZEKE Award, Nicolo Filippo Rosso, who very coincidentally is also doing a migration story, but more about Central Americans from the Northern Triangle who are migrating north, fleeing violence and climate change and attempts to get into the U.S. So those will be the 2 major things on the banner. And then there are 5 honorable mention winners as well with extraordinary stories that will be presented on the banner.
Mm-hmm.
And is Photoville going to be, now that it's not going to be in containers necessarily, are the exhibitions going to be centralized in one area? And are these specific exhibits of SDN going to be at the same spot?
No. So while it was the container village, it was all directly underneath the Brooklyn Bridge in this kind of contained area. Since last year, it's actually expanded in a much larger area around the Brooklyn piers and the Brooklyn waterfront. So it's a much larger area that it will encompass.
We actually had Meryl Meisler on the show a couple weeks ago, and her exhibit for Photoville is going to be at a Brooklyn school, actually a school that she taught at one point. So it's going to be expanding, throughout the borough at least.
And actually, Photoville is expanding throughout all the boroughs. Starting last year, they actually do have exhibits throughout New York City. Although still, the central focus is still the Brooklyn waterfront in Dumbo. Mm-hmm. Unlike last year, there will be an opening day, an in-person opening day, which will be Saturday, September 18th from 1 to 9 p.m. But for our exhibit, we're getting as many photographers who could be in town, the jurors and other SDN members and supporters, to congregate at our banner from 1 to 3 p.m. on Saturday, the 18th. So we'll be there then.
Good to know. And Sofia, are you going to be speaking at any of these events?
Yeah, so Glen invited me, so I'm going to be at the banner on the 18th. I'm really excited. And
is this the first time that the work is going to be seen publicly outside of the website?
Yes.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
But we're also doing with Photoville a virtual panel on October 2nd. So there's information on the Photoville and our website about that, and Sofia will be speaking then.
All right. Wonderful. And maybe as a way to wrap up, Glen, can you tell us, or maybe, mention to photographers out there who might be interested in putting their work up on SDN and being involved in the community, what do you recommend?
Well, the first thing, the requirements for an exhibit on SDN are pretty basic, but they should understand that it requires a minimum of 6 pictures and really no technical maximum, but keep it reasonable. But that's because we've never been about the individual photograph. It's always been about using a collection of photographs to take stories. And we do really value the importance of text. So photographers need to show up at the site with 6 pictures, an abstract, which is basically a project description, and then captions for each of those images. And that's the minimum. And then there's opportunities to put in lots of other information, including video, if they choose to. And then that's just the website, of course. Our education program starts the 3rd week in September with some fantastic faculty. Ed Kashi's teaching again, although his class is already completely filled up. But
no doubt.
Sheila Pre-Bright is teaching a class. Michael Snyder on environmentalism and photography. For the first time, we're doing lecture classes, and Michelle Bogre will be teaching a photo history class.
All right. It's a wrap of another wonderful show. It's been really, really great talking with you guys, Glen and Sofia. Glen, if people want to catch up with more of your work, where can they go to?
Well, they can go to the Social Documentary Network website, socialdocumentary.net. If they're interested in seeing my work, they could search for my name on the site. But my work is fairly old, and I probably had the first exhibit on the site from 2008. But there's a lot more recent work that they could explore on the site.
And Sofia, if people want to catch up with what you're up to, Instagram, websites, where can they go to? And SDN, of course.
Yeah, of course, SDN. And from there, you can actually link to my website and Instagram. But my website is sofiaaldinio.com. And yeah, the Instagram, Sofia Aldinio.
And all of these links will be in our show notes. So if you didn't jot them down, they are there. If you enjoy listening to the B&H Photography Podcast and you're not yet a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Head on over to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you snag your favorite podcast and type in B&H Photography Podcast, hit enter, and you are part of the family. And if you are already a subscriber, leave a nice comment. The boss actually reads these things. And you could always find us on the B&H Explorer website and on the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. My name is Alan Weitz, and on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you oh so much for tuning in today.